Thanks for coming. Today I want to talk to you about positioning. And, positioning has kind of been a pet topic of mine for a long time. And it used to be when I talked to conference organizers and said, I want to do a talk on positioning, they'd be like, can't you do a talk on something cooler? And I'd be like, no, this is really important, actually. Positioning, in my mind, is one of the most strategic levers we have for growth at a startup, and yet it is deeply, tragically, comically misunderstood. In fact, it's so misunderstood that generally, when I talk to people about positioning, the first thing I have to do is explain what positioning is not. So positioning is not your tagline. Positioning is not another word for messaging. Positioning is not the same thing as branding or your go-to-market strategy. I've had some people tell me positioning is just another way of saying marketing in general, and it's none of those things. All of those things flow from positioning, but you have to figure out your positioning first before you can get to that stuff downstream. You can think of it this way. If marketing and sales is the house, positioning is the foundation upon which the house is built. I like to define it this way. Positioning defines how your product is the best in the world at something that a well-defined set of customers cares a lot about. It's a bit of a mouthful, I'll say it again. Positioning defines how your product is the best in the world at something that a well-defined set of customers cares a lot about. Conceptually, I like to think of positioning as context setting for products. Context is important because it's kind of how we make sense of the world, in particular new things or things that we have never encountered before. So if we encounter a new product, we're generally looking for clues in the context as to what that product is all about. This is an example of a product that I encountered once completely out of context. You know what I thought this thing was? I thought it was a shoe. Yeah, I thought this was like Crocs was doubling down on the ugly shoe thing, and they thought we'll open up the toe and we'll put little thing at the back. But then later I saw this thing in context, and it became obvious what it was and what it was good for. It's not a shoe, that's a dog muzzle, and what it's good for is humiliating your dog in public. In fact, context is such a strong thing that even a little hint of context can completely change the way you think about a product. So I show you this dog, and then I show you this thing, and you might think, that must be a dog thing too. That's probably one of those dog cone things so the dog doesn't bite himself or whatever. And in fact, it's a cone for humans. It's for if you're eating noodles, apparently it keeps the noodles from splashing on your face. I actually have no idea what that's good for, but the marketers are giving you a clue here. But see that guy? They're giving you a clue what it's good for. It's for making people fall in love with you. Yeah. The point of that is that a change in context can completely change the way we think about a product. Some people ask me, is positioning still a relevant concept for startups? Because it's not a new concept. It's been around since the 80s. And according to me, it's super relevant. In fact, I think one of the main reasons it's relevant is because the markets that we operate in are intensely crowded. So I like to show this set of slides just to freak everybody out about how crowded our markets are. Like, we say this a lot, our markets are crowded. I'm at marketing conferences a lot, and marketers say it all the time. But I don't think we feel in our bones just how bad this really is. So allow me to freak you out about markets. So in 2012, I was working in the marketing technology space, and this guy, Scott Brinkler, came out with this thing called the Marketing Technology Landscape. And at the time this thing came out, and we were like, oh God, look at that. So you know what it is? It's like, imagine the universe of solutions for problems. This is one guy's attempt to model just one little corner of that, just the solution to marketing problems. And look at that thing, there's 350 companies on there. And so we looked at it and said, ooh, this is bad. It's our job to stand out from all of the other companies on this chart. Even worse, our customer has the job of trying to figure out what they should pay attention to here and who they should put on a short list if they're going to solve a marketing problem. In fact, this was so bad when we looked at it, we decided that no one can figure this out. So it can't stay like this. In fact, the market will consolidate and everybody will buy everybody else. And if we fast forward 5 years, there'll be like a dozen companies left on this thing. And so we can just ignore this. So let's go 5 years and see how we did. Oh, bad, really bad. So there's now 7,000 companies on this chart. That's bad. Like, think about it. That's 6,650 brand new companies in the last 5 years have now entered this little tiny corner of the market. So if it was important for your product to really stand out and get noticed and be differentiated in the market 5 years ago, it's critically important now. If your customers were overwhelmed with choices 5 years ago, now it's like the marketing apocalypse. What's happening in here now? So if you look at the research for this stuff and you ask yourself, how do customers figure this stuff out? The research tells you that customers use what they know to figure out what they don't. So they use what they already understand to figure out something new that they don't yet understand. And when they do this, they've got two major comparison points. One is market categories, the other one is trends. Market categories answer the basic questions, what is this thing? Why should I care? Trend answers a secondary question, which is, why is this important to me right now? Let's start with market categories. So if we go back to Scott's chart, you can see that he's divided this chart out slightly into market categories to help you figure it out. First, he's got it organized by color, so you can't read it because it's such an eye chart. But the orange stuff is content and experience. The yellow stuff is social and relationships, etc. So let's say I'm a vice president of marketing and I need to look for a solution to do, I don't know, live chat on my website. I might say, yeah, that kind of sounds like social and relationships. Oh yeah, sure enough, there's a box in there called bots and live chat. That's great. Now I'm not looking at 7,000 solutions anymore. It's still kind of crowded, to tell you the truth. But I'm looking at a few dozen. This is good. But that's not all a market category does. So when I declare myself in a certain market category, it actually sets off a really powerful set of assumptions in the minds of customers about what your product is all about. It looks a bit like this. Let's say this is one of these like pitch contest things, and I come up and all I'm allowed to tell you is the market category that I'm in. So I come up on stage and I say, hi, I'm April. I'm here to pitch you my product, and my product is a CRM. Who's my competitor? Salesforce. Yeah. What features have I got? Tracking accounts, tracking a deal, CRM type stuff, right? What's my price? Well, it ain't going to be more than Salesforce. They're the leader in this market, so they get to charge a premium. So I set a ceiling for my price. You don't know exactly what I am, but I can't charge more than Salesforce. Who's my target customer? Vice President of Sales. That's who buys a CRM. So think about it. If I do a good job of declaring a market category, and that sets off a set of assumptions about my product that are all true, great. I just save myself a lot of effort. I don't have to tell you who my competitor is. It's assumed. I don't have to list every single feature that my product has. Half of them are table stakes. Unfortunately, it works the same way. If I do a lousy job of choosing my market category, and that triggers a set of assumptions about my product that are not true, then my marketing and sales teams are going to have to make a significant effort to undo the damage that my positioning has already done. I'll give you an example. I had these guys call me. The investor is a guy I know in the Valley, and he had just invested in this company. And he said, look, these guys are great. They've got fantastic customers, but their problem is they have to have 1 million sales calls before a customer figures out what they're all about. So we think they have a positioning problem. You should help them. I said, sure. So we get on the phone together, and I said, okay, what do you guys do? And they said, what we have is email for lawyers. And I was like, email for lawyers? Who knew the lawyers needed their own email? Okay, I'm not a lawyer. What do I know? And they said, yeah, we're ex-lawyers, so we know all about this. And we built this email for lawyers. So then they jump into the demo. So they're giving me the demo. Here's all the stuff we do, blah, blah, blah. And it looks like email. There's an inbox. There's conversations going on. And finally I said, like, what's the calendar look like for this thing? And they're like, oh, no, we don't have a calendar. I'm like, wait, you don't have a calendar, so can I replace Gmail or Outlook with you guys? They're like, no, we don't have a calendar. I'm like, buh, so I don't understand. You sound like crappy email. Like, so why does everybody love you so much? And they're like, well, we have this special feature. We have a patent on it. And what it is this context-aware, super secure file sharing. So it figures out who should have access to a file between the lawyers and the client, puts it in this super secure place, and only gives access to the people that are supposed to have access to it. That's pretty cool. It's also not email. It's not email. So the problem is what you have here is a really cool product masquerading as kind of shitty email. So let's put it in a different market category. Let's say it's not email for lawyers. Let's say it's team collaboration for lawyers. Totally different set of assumptions. So I say I'm team collaboration. Now I don't compete with Gmail anymore. Who do I compete with? Slack-ish, except it's for lawyers. I don't know, Slack doesn't do anything particular for lawyers. So they must do some fancy team collaboration lawyery stuff like super secure file sharing doodad thing. All of a sudden, their cool feature makes sense. It's for lawyers, I already told you that. We had the best conversation about pricing. So the worst part about being in the email business is everybody expects your thing to be free. So these guys said, well, now your team collaboration, that's great, because I can charge lots of money for that. And even better, team collaboration for lawyers. I was like, oh, you know what you guys should do? You should call the lawyers, and when they ask you about the pricing, you say, yeah, we got this pricing. It's special for lawyers. We're going to charge you by the minute. And just let that dangle. And call me, because I want to be there when you do it. But they didn't do that, because they're not listening to me. But I think they're leaving money on the table with that one, to tell you the truth. But anyway, so a shift in market context can really change the way we think about something. So how do we actually do positioning? There's kind of two steps to it. The first one is you need to position your product deliberately. And the second step is you need to follow a process. The deliberate positioning thing is kind of interesting. The majority of startups that I work with have never positioned their products deliberately. They're a bit like the email for lawyers guys. They started out to build email for lawyers. They never really questioned that. In their mind, that's always what they were, email for lawyers. And so, they got it out in the market. It turned out it could have been positioned better in another way. They just never checked in on that. So the first thing we have to do is figure out how do we actually deliberately take a step back and say, maybe we're not the thing we always thought we were. Here's an example. Maybe. I love these guys. They're in Kitchener in Ontario. They're called Clearpath Robotics. The founders are two guys with degrees in mechatronics engineering. They're robot guys. They decide they're going to do robots. And so their startup is selling robots. Eventually they get this idea for this thing over on the right. And what it is, it's a robot that drives around a manufacturing plant, and it delivers things from one place to another. Now, if you're like me, you don't know much about robots, you might not think that sounds like a hard problem to solve, but it turns out that thing's a miracle of modern science. They have a team of people with artificial intelligence degrees. It's full of sensors and mapping, and it moves around and does a lot of smart stuff. They bring it out to market, they get meetings with manufacturers, and they walk in and they say, hi, we're Clearpath Robotics, and we got this fancy new robot. And the minute they say that, their buyers look at them and they go, robots. We got robots, man. We got robots. We've been using robots for decades. In fact, we got robot vendors. We know what robots cost. We probably have a vendor that does that thing you do. And the Clearpath Robotic guys are going, no, you don't understand. We're special robots. Special robots. Different than any robot you've ever seen before, in fact. Let us tell you how special they are. And just like the email for lawyers guys, they're having a hard time convincing people that they aren't this thing on the left that basically picks up a roll of tape and puts it in a cardboard box. So eventually they got this idea, maybe we're not robots. Maybe what we do is different than that. So they took a step back and they said, all right, so what are we? So what's special about us? First of all, mobility. It drives around. It's full of artificial intelligence. It's full of mapping and sensors. So then they said, well, what market category could we position ourselves in that would make it obvious that we do that stuff? Drives around, mapping and sensors. And eventually they decided, you know what we've built? It's actually a self-driving car or an autonomous vehicle for industrial uses. So they repositioned this thing as that. What's interesting about these guys too is they went all the way. Like they changed the name of the division to Auto, O-T-T-O, to drive home this fact that they were like a self-driving car. It went all the way down to the industrial design. So you can see that it's got white lights at the front and red lights, brake lights at the back. It doesn't need any lights at all. It's a robot. Those things don't do anything. They're just there to make you think that this thing is like a car, so you figure it out. The founder has a really neat story about fundraising. I'll get to this later, but usually your pitch for investors and your pitch for customers is very different. But in this case, they went fundraising in the Valley, and when they had the old positioning where they were robots, they went in to pitch this VC, and they said, what we've got are these little robots. It's like a little robot, and it drives around on the ground. And the VC said, what, like a Roomba? And they were super offended. They're like artificial intelligence mechatronics engineers, like, we're not making a vacuum cleaner here, people. And then they did the repositioning, and then they get to go in and say, yeah, we're like self-driving car tech. We're sort of like Elon Musk shit. And they raised $30 million. So that's the first thing, deliberate positioning. The second thing is that you need to follow a positioning process. So my background is I've been a vice president of marketing across 7 startups. 6 of those startups got acquired by big companies. Through the course of all 7 startups plus the big companies, I've repositioned and launched 16 products into market. And my background is not in marketing at all. I actually have a degree in systems design engineering from the University of Waterloo. And I kind of lucked into my first marketing job. Like, I graduated, I didn't know what I wanted to do. My friend worked at a startup. She got me a job. It was in the marketing department. We got acquired. My boss quit. I'm in charge. So I was a little worried I was going to get fired on that first one because I didn't know what I was doing. So I embarked on a decade-long self-study thing in marketing. So I bought a lot of books. I went and took a lot of courses. And marketers are snobby. So I took some courses at U of T, and American marketers were like, and I was like, I'm trying to figure all this stuff out. And they're like, where'd you go to school? And I said, well, I took some courses at University of Toronto. They're like, Northwestern, maybe you've heard of it. That's where the real marketers go. I'm like, all right, okay. So I went and took some classes at Northwestern. Kotler is there. I took a class with Kotler. We were in the elevator together once. He's like a marketing guy. And through all of this, I learned a lot of really good stuff. But the one thing I did not learn was a positioning process, which I found hilarious. I'm like, so I have this thing, it's this foundational concept, everything sits on top of that, and yet you're telling me we got no process to do it. In fact, we have none, at least not one that makes any sense. So what they taught me was this thing, which is the positioning statement. So of all the dumb things I've learned in business, this is by far the dumbest. You ever done one of these, positioning statement? It's like a Mad Libs fill in the blanks exercise where you say, we are a blank that does blank for blankety blank blank blank. So what you do is you write down, like, this is the market category I'm in, and this is my differentiator, and these are my competitors, and this is my values. So you just fill in the blanks. So the first time I heard this thing, I had already repositioned 2 products, and one of them, we had originally positioned it as a single-use database that competed with Access, and we repositioned it as kind of a embedded database for mobile devices. So I'm sitting at the back, and I'm like, wait, how do I know? Like, you're supposed to write down the market category, but how do I know what the right one is? Like, as far as I could tell, most products could be positioned in multiple different market categories, so how do I know what the best one is? So I'm at the back with my hand up, and the professor says, yeah, you. And I'm like, but how do I know? Like, if I'm just writing down the market category, how do I know what's the best market category? And the guy says, trust me, April, you'll know. I'm I'm an engineer. My life doesn't work like that. That's stupid. So don't do that. That's dumb. That's just dumb. In fact, not only is this bad, it is potentially harmful because it tricks you into thinking there's only one right answer, and the right answer is the first thing that pops into your head, and that is almost never true. So don't do this. So this question started to vex me for a long time, and in fact, it vexed me for like 10 years. So I thought, well, there's got to be a way to do this, right? Like, we just haven't figured it out yet. So the first thing I thought is, I don't know, I'm applying my engineering sensibilities to this. I'm like, we must be able to break it down into little pieces, and then I'll solve for little pieces. And the pieces made sense to me that I would take the blanks of the positioning statement, right? And then all I got to do is figure out how to solve for each of those. So it turns out if you deconstruct the positioning statement, there are 5 component pieces to positioning. First one is, what's my market category? Which category do I play in? Second one is, what are the competitive alternatives? So what do customers compare me to? Next one is, what are my unique attributes or features for my product? Next one is the value. So what is the value that my product can deliver? And the last one is, who's my target customer segment? So as far as I could tell, all I got to do is figure out the right answer for those 5 things, and I got it, right? Easy. Not. So here's why it's not easy. So once you start looking at it, you realize that all the components have a relationship to each other. This is why we don't have a process, because this is actually super hard. So think about it. The value that my product can deliver that is differentiated is based on the unique differentiated features of my product. But the differentiated features of my product are only different if I compare them to a competitive comparable. My customer segment, my target customer segment, is completely dependent on the value. Because my best fit customer, those are people that care a lot about the value I can deliver. So those things are related. And then the last thing, the market category, is essentially context that makes the value I deliver obvious to the people I'm trying to communicate it to. So then you get in this catch-22 thing. Where do I start? If everything's related to everything else, can you actually start in a spot and get to where you need to go? And literally for 5 years, I thought the answer to that question was no. You can't. You're just going to have to spiral around until you figure it out. And in fact, most marketing, vice presidents of marketing I knew, that's how we were doing it. We would start somewhere in here and we'd spiral around till we get to it. At one point, I took a job as an entrepreneur in residence at a startup accelerator, and I decided I was going to figure this out by guinea pigging a bunch of startups in there who volunteered, by the way, to do this with me. And we tried starting at different spots and seeing, did the spiral come around quicker if we started in different places. And what became apparent is if we started anywhere except competitive alternatives, our first iteration on it was neat positioning, but not differentiated at all. So the trick with this is to actually do it in order, and the order has to flow like this. So you start with competitive comparables, and this is where everybody blows it, like they blow it on the first step, because in startups, we tend to think of our competitors in a completely different way than our customers do. So most startups, if I go in and say, who's your competitor, they will list some big, long list of 3-person startups in the valley that they are competing with for investment dollars that their customers have never heard of. So when I say competitive alternatives here, what you actually want to do is go to your customers and say, hey, if we didn't exist, what would you use? And in B2B, the answer to that question is almost always, do it in Excel, or hire an intern, or something like that. If you have the wrong starting point, then everything else on this will be wrong. So if I'm comparing myself to little guys in the valley, I might say something like this, and startups tell me this all the time. Our competitive differentiator is ease of use. Look at the experience. It's like 3 clicks to do this thing, and all our competitors takes 19, 29 clicks. And our user experience is way, way, way better. But then you go talk to the customers, you say, hey, what would you do if these guys didn't exist? They'd say, oh, I'd hire an intern. You're never going to beat the intern. Like, you're just never. Like, the easiest thing in the world is Joey, the intern. Like, give me a coffee, fill out that spreadsheet, come back when you're done. So you're there highlighting this thing that you think is really differentiated, but in fact you can never, ever, ever win on, because your real competitive comparable is a thing that's a slam dunk. So you have to get the competitive comparables right, and then you cascade down from there. So you say, all right, my real competition is Joey. What have I got that Joey doesn't have? And how does that translate into value for my customers? That's the answer to the question, so what? So you've got all these features, so what, to your customer's business. Once you've got that value, then you say, who cares a lot about that value? So I had a client I was working with that their value was a thing that allowed you to do invoice processing really, really simple and easy. And when we got to this step of it, who cares a lot about that value? Well, if you don't do a lot of invoices in a month, you just don't care that much. But if you do tons and tons, like thousands of invoices in a month, then you care a lot. So what you're trying to do in this customers that care stage is figure out a segmentation that's actionable and allows you to sort of select a really best fit customer. And then the last piece of this is market category. So my best market category makes my value obvious to the people that want that value the most. Now, you get to this part and you think, okay, that sounds a little tricky, April, but I think we can figure it out. But then there's this whole other level of complexity. Before we get to that. There's a difference between positioning for a customer and positioning for a VC. So if you were to go through that whole process, it looks completely different for a VC than it does for a customer. This process is really oriented around positioning for customers. VCs are a totally different thing. Like, VCs are interested in where you're going to be in 10 years and the big vision for what your company's going to be and how you're going to disrupt the market. Customers are interested in what you can do for them right now. So they're going to pay you something to solve a problem that they have right now. A lot of the companies that I work with that have positioning problems, the reason they're positioning for customers is crummy is because they've spent a lot of time recently fundraising, and the pitch for VCs has bled into the pitch for customers. And a lot of times the pitch for VCs is not what a customer wants to hear right now. They want to know you're going to be in business in 10 years, but they don't necessarily want to know that your big plan is to strip out everything they've got on their back end that they've already invested in and replace it with something else. Sometimes they're scared of that. So you have to be careful. If you're doing this exercise, it's for customers, not for VCs, and it's perfectly fine if those two positionings are completely different. Coming back to this thing, let's say you go through this whole process and then you get to this last stage, which is, okay, now I got my market category. There's this additional level of complexity, which is complicated, and I'm going to touch on it like super fast. So there are fundamentally three ways to position in a market. You're either positioning in an existing market or you're creating a new market. If you are positioning in an existing market, there's two ways you can do that. You can either position head-to-head against the leader in the market. That's like saying, I'm in the CRM business, and I'm just a CRM. By saying that, you've essentially declared war on Mark Benioff. You're like, Salesforce, they're going down. I'm going to be like the CRM for everybody. Or, that sounds hard, you might decide, look, I'm just a little startup. I can't beat Benioff everywhere, but I can be a heck of a good CRM for investment banks, or CRM for lawyers, or CRM for a little corner that is underserved by Salesforce, and so I'm going to be bigger fish in a smaller pond. The last one is where I say, you know what, my thing is so new and so revolutionary and so innovative, no existing category can contain it, so I am going to create a new category. For each of these, there are certain instances where you would use it and instances where you do not want to use it. So for example, this head-to-head style, if there is an existing entrenched competitor in an established market, it is very, very unlikely that you will ever unseat it. The only time you want to use this style is if the category itself is emerging, so people understand what the category is all about, but they don't know who the leader is yet. So like, in Ontario, we have these guys, North, that are doing the smart glasses. They're a bit doing this. And this is a case where you might do it. We kind of know what smart glasses are. We don't really know who the leader is. North has raised a pile of money. They're smart dudes. Maybe it's them. So they're taking a run at the entire category. That's the only time you'd want to be here. The rest of the time, what you want to do is this bigger fish, smaller pond, where you're in an existing category, you're positioning in a beachhead somewhere where the leader is underserving, and you got something the leader doesn't have. The risk with this one is the leader sees you getting some traction down there and they copy what you're doing or they buy somebody. So ideally, you've got something that's not easy to copy. I'll give you an example of one later on this. But this is where the majority of startups start, is this. And then once you dominate a little segment, you push out, you push out, you push out, until eventually you're big enough and strong enough and scary enough that you can take on the leader in the entire category. The last one, everybody likes to talk about this, but almost nobody ever does it because it's the hardest one by far, is where you create a market category and then you position yourself in there. So the vast majority of companies that you think of as category creators did not start this way. So they started out as little niche-y things, and then when they got like 100 million revenue, 200 million revenue, then they did this thing. The hard part about this is, at the beginning, you're not even selling a solution, you're selling the problem. If people knew the problem existed, then a category of solutions to solve that problem would exist in their minds as well. So what you're doing here is you're going out to get some investment, you're getting very patient investors, and then you're convincing them to go on this long ride with you while you convince the market that they have a problem. And then once they've decided they do have a problem, then you convince them that you're the best solution to that problem. And oh, by the way, that's the exact moment when 1,000 copycat little competitors are going to pile in. And then if you're lucky, you take the category. Seems like a lot of stuff, April. You kind of hit me with the wind tunnel of words. But it's okay, because through the graciousness of Startupfest, everybody gets a book. And it's all in the book in gory, gruesome detail. And so you don't really have to take pictures of anything, because you could just read the chapter on it. And it's more than what you're going to get here in like 10 seconds. So there's that. That's market categories. The second piece that I mentioned is trends. So market categories, again, they answer the question, what is this thing and why should I care? Trends is interesting. Like if market categories is sort of positioning 101, trends is kind of a positioning 401 class. So if you get the market category thing down and you're really being fancy about this, you can do the trends thing, and it's really cool if you can get it to work. So I'm going to touch on this. So first of all, we're really bad in tech at distinguishing between categories and trends at a macro level. So the way I like to describe it is, this company Pantone? They're like the color people. Every year they come out with this press release. They apparently it's scientific. They look around at like fashion and stuff, and they decide what the color of the year is going to be. And then they put out a press release, and this year the press release said, okay, color of the year 2019 is living coral, which is pink-ish. And then they put that press release out, and then all the people that follow this stuff say, oh my God, we got to have some living coral in our stuff. And the next thing you know, I got a living coral couch and pants and shoes and bowls and pillows and stuff. If you produce a living coral couch, you're still in the couch business. Your market category hasn't changed. But you have applied a trend to that market category in order to make it seem hip and cool and now, and to appeal to the people that follow that stuff. In tech, it kind of looks like this. So market categories are clusters of things that you can buy. So networking gear is a market category. CRM is a market category. Security systems, accounting software, these are market categories. Trends are things that I can apply to almost any of those market categories, and they're kind of hip and cool and interesting right now. So artificial intelligence falls into this, machine learning falls into this. A few years ago, we would have said cloud. So any of these trends can apply to any of the market categories. You might wonder why we care about trends at all. We care for a lot of different reasons. One of the reasons we care is because the media cares, and influencers care, and people that write care, people that stand on stages at conferences like to talk about the new stuff, because we can't just write the same article about CRM over and over and over again. It's boring. So what we write about is the new cool stuff. That gets people thinking about the possibilities of the new cool stuff, and customers in particular start to get worried. Maybe the new cool stuff is something I need to learn about. Maybe it's going to disrupt what I'm doing. And the next thing you know, the next vendor that walks through their door says, hey, that's neat, you got the CRM, but what about the AI? I need to understand the AI. And you, if you don't have an answer to that question, just don't seem like you're with it as much. So it doesn't actually transform the market completely, but it does give the market a little, something. So it kind of works like this. What you're trying to do from a positioning standpoint is you're trying to look for the intersection between your solution, your market category, and a relevant set of trends for your market. So it looks like this. Now, you can be down here, and this is okay. So what this means is I've positioned myself really well in a market category, and it means people can figure out what I do, but I haven't looped in any trends, and that's okay. That just means I'm understandable, but I'm not necessarily cool. So I spent decades selling databases and really boring middleware stuff, and it's just fine. Like the last product I worked at in middleware, we were doing $1 billion in revenue, and there was nothing cool about it. Nobody wrote anything about us in the press. Nobody cared, but we still sold tons of it. So if you're going to miss out in a quadrant, where you want to be is down at the bottom. Where you do get into trouble is if you miss it and you're in one of these other two quadrants, and this is where bad things happen. So you can miss it and be off to the one side where you're talking about your solution and you get so carried away with the trend that you're talking a lot about the trend, but you forgot the market category. So what ends up is you sound cool, but you're kind of baffling, like nobody can figure out what you actually are, but there's like, it's cool, but I don't really get it. I'm going to pick on this company that called me once. So again, the investors introduced me, and the investor had written these guys a really big check, and he said, oh, you got to talk to these guys. Nobody can understand what they do. And so they got on the phone, and we're on a Zoom call, and there's like 1,000 of them on the other end of the Zoom call, and everybody's face is in like this, and they're all talking at the same time. And I said, hey, what do you guys do? And they're all talking at the same time, and they said, what we are is a sharing economy for pets. And so I don't know what that is. And I'm like, what's a sharing economy for pets? And they're all blah, 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 they're all talking at the same time. And they kept saying it over and over again. With sharing economy for pets, a sharing economy for pets. And I'm like, I don't know what the sharing economy for pets is. Like, you guys are going to have to explain it to me. And then they kept repeating it. And I have like a little dog. And I was like, my dog's too small. I can't share him. How's that going to work? And they're like, no, we're not sharing your pet, stupid. And then, then they were getting frustrated. I was getting frustrated. And the CEO was at the back. And eventually he's like, okay, shut up. Everybody shut up. Get out of the way. I'm going to explain it to this stupid Canadian lady. And he gets in and he says, okay, I'm going to say it real slow so you understand it. What we do is Uber for cats. No shit. Like, he actually said that. And I'm in my office like this. And I'm like, I wonder what he thinks he means by that. Like when he says that, what does he mean? And then I kind of went into sort of little dreamland where I was like, the cats are driving. They've taught the cats how to drive. It's going to be fantastic. And then I might have said that out loud. And then the guy got really mad. And then he finally told me what he actually was. And what this thing was a two-sided marketplace for pet services. So you want to order a dog groomer, come to your house and groom your dog. They'll show up in their car and you can track them on the thing like Uber. And like this is nothing to do with Uber in my mind, right? And you can see how they got into this problem in that they had just raised a round of financing, and my friend, who was the investor, his whole fund specializes in this sharing economy stuff. So they went in and they pitched sharing economy for pets, and my guy loved it and said, this is fantastic, I'm writing you a check. And they think, that's our pitch, sharing economy for pets. And then they go out to pitch the dog groomer, and the dog groomer's like, I have no freaking idea what you're talking about. Nobody knows what they're talking about. Their website says sharing economy for pets, nobody gets it. So that's that. The last one is this one over here, where you're talking about the market context and you get really excited about the trends. So you're talking a lot about trends. The problem is that neither one of those things has anything to do with your solution, which we call bullshit. So you just kind of wishful thinking is what this one is. So my favorite example of this one is, you know this story? Some of you must know this story. So there's this company, Long Island Iced Tea. Like, they do iced tea, and for some reason they're listed on the NASDAQ. I don't know why they're listed on the NASDAQ. That sounds weird to me, but they are. So they're listed on the NASDAQ, and iced tea business is not going so good, so the stock is going down. And the NASDAQ calls them up and said, we're going to have to delist you because your valuation is too low. So we're going to kick you off the exchange. So they try to do some things, you know, to get the stock price up, and none of it was working. And they had this looming deadline, and so eventually they had like a week, and they said, look, if your stock doesn't hit this certain price by the end of the week, we got to give you the boot. And so they had this kind of last-ditch attempt to jack the stock price. So what they did was they put out a press release, and the press release said, we are changing our name, and we're going to change our name to Long Blockchain. And that was it. Like that was really it. There was no blockchain strategy. There were no partnerships announced. There was no technology. Like that. Like literally nothing. Like we used to be called Long Island Iced Tea. Now we're Long Blockchain. The end. And so I'm reading this press release. This is in the news, right? So I'm reading this press release in my office, and I'm like, nice try. People are not that stupid. That's not going to work. You can't just lie. Like, you can't just say, hey, we're blockchain and the stock price goes up. The world doesn't work like that. And then, of course, it totally works. So the stock goes up 400%. And not only does it go up 400%, it stays there for like days and days and days. Like, so every day I come into my office, I open this thing up, and I'm like, fuck, man. World doesn't work the way I thought. I should just tell people to lie. Like, I should just tell people to lie. I'm like, oh my God, I'm going to the bar. I'm talking to the bartender. I'm like, nothing works the way I thought it did in my life, you know. And every day, like, it goes for like 2 weeks. Every single day, the stock is up 400%. I'm like, I can't believe this works. Like, people are so stupid. And of course, eventually, the stock pickers kept calling Long Island Iced Tea, and they're calling in, and they're like, "So, where's the blockchain strategy? You guys have a blockchain strategy, right?" And apparently, what the Long Island Iced Tea guys did was like, they pick up the phone and they'd be like, "Oh, it's Goldman Sachs. Yeah, you're breaking up, blockchain." Like, hang up the phone. And so they wouldn't say anything, and they just persisted in saying nothing for like weeks and weeks. And so finally, stock picker guys are like, okay, these guys are nuts. And they all sold. And then all the people that were still in because they thought the iced tea business was okay, they're like, oh my God, these guys are nuts. And they sold too. And then the stock went to zero, and I felt better about life, and they got delisted. That's the end of that story. So don't do that. What you want to do is be right in the middle. And right in the middle takes a little bit more effort than just making some stuff up. So I'm going to use these guys as an example. So I'm a consultant now, and I work with companies on positioning stuff. These guys are a client of mine. They're called Redgate Software, and they're a great example of something that is super boring and yet super successful. So they have 400 employees, they have 800,000 active customers, and they do database tools. It's super boring. It's like database backup, database recovery. It's not even SaaS. It's like so boring, but super profitable, never raised a dime of venture capital. All the original guys are super wealthy. And so there's Redgate. So what happened to them is a few years ago, they hired a new vice president of sales. And the new vice president of sales identified two things. So one was he analyzed what was going on when the inside sales reps called out. And he identified two things. So the first thing was, Redgate had gradually grown over the years to add more and more and more products to their portfolio. And he noticed that each product had its own product manager and its own positioning and essentially was leading in its own little market. But as a result, they didn't have a story that brought them together. So the salespeople, in essence, called in and sold folks one product. Oh, you need database backup? Oh, yeah, I got one of those. And then they'd call the next guy. Oh, you need recovery? I got one of those. Instead of trying to sell them all the things, 21 products they had. So that was the first one. So he surmised, new VP, that, hey, we're leaving money on the table. Second thing, he identified an objection that the salespeople were starting to get. So this was a few years back when GDPR was the thing. And so what was happening is Salesforce would call in and they say, hey, we got backup, recovery, whatever boring stuff. And the IT department said, look, not a priority this year. Everything's GDPR. What do you guys do for GDPR? And they're like, nothing. And they're like, okay, call me next year when the GDPR, 5-alarm fire is no longer burning in my IT department. So these are the two things. So they thought maybe they could do something to string the products together. Secondly, they needed something to do with GDPR because they were getting an objection that was a thing. If they didn't have a story there, they didn't have a story. So they went to their customers and said, okay, it's a GDPR thing. What are you doing for GDPR? And their customers all said, we are doing a DevOps transformation. So all the IT departments were hiring consultants and buying software and doing this DevOps transformation. Almost all of that was centered on how they built and delivered code. Almost none of it touched data. So the Redgate guys looked at that and said, that's nuts. How can you be doing a DevOps transformation and not worry about data? By the way, we're the database tools people. And so what they did was developed a point of view on what they called database DevOps. So they wrote a bunch of papers on it. They have a handful of guys that are super smart on this. They send them to the speaking circuit. If we were at the IT conference, they'd be standing up here going, you're doing a DevOps transformation and you're not touching backup and recovery and provisioning. You're doing it wrong. By the way, we sell a whole bunch of tools to help you do that if you think that's important. So they then trained their sales force to go in and deliver that pitch on an outbound call. So when they say, what do you got going on for GDPR? They're like, we got this database DevOps thing. They explain it. So two things happen. One, they went from selling, on average, 1.3 products into an account to selling more than 6 products for every outbound sales call their sales team did, which is a significant difference. The second thing was they got 100 times increase in inbound leads coming into Redgate, which is a sign of hotness. So what that means is that all of a sudden they're doing a thing that's kind of cool, people want to hear about it, they're actually calling them. So it's a good example of how you can just hit this thing, the bullseye, where you've got all 3 things coming together. So that's pretty much it. I'm going to leave you with 3 things. One, you need to position your products deliberately. 2, if you're going to position, you need to use a process, not a stupid positioning statement. You need to actually have a process that gets you there in a sensible way. The last thing is, you need to be able to leverage trends. You don't have to, but if you can, it's pretty cool. But you got to be wise when you do it and be easy on that. And if you want to send me an email or something, that's how you do it. But otherwise, I'm going to take questions. Thank you. Anybody got a question? We have time. I'm finished early. Usually I run long. It's because it's hot up here. I'm going fast. Yeah.
Hi, my name is Marina. I love what you said. Got me thinking. We've been advised not to use like the typical, like, let's say, we're Uber of this.
There you go.
Okay.
There you go.
Hello. My question is about the positioning, and we've been advised not to use the Uber of this or Expedia of that. So what do you advise instead? Because if I say Uber of this, it's kind of simpler.
Yeah. So the question is like, you know, if I can't say I'm Uber for this, like that's easier in some ways. Here's the problem. Uber's not a market category. Like Uber is a company. And so when you say I'm Uber for this, you have a very specific meaning in mind. But that meaning might not be the same for your customers or for any random two people that you put together. So you may be thinking, well, that means we're on mobile and I can track things and whatever. Or it might be this like the sharing economy example, right? There's a resource and it's shared and whatever. But you might say it to me and say, I'm Uber for something, and I might say, so that means you break the law, you're a bunch of dicks, like you can't keep any senior staff, you're just like a rotating, you're just like idiots, like that, you know. So it's better to say what you are. Like the actual market category is not the same. The other thing is that Uber plays in multiple market categories. They do food delivery, they do driving, they do whatever. And so you're better to just say, we're this, like the actual thing you do. Because then it just takes away all that ambiguity. So, you know, like in the case of my example, this, you know, Uber for cats. The thing is they're pet services. That's what they are, pet services, like a groomer and whatever. And they should just say that. We're pet services. We're mobile-enabled pet services. We're a marketplace for pet services. There's 1,000 ways to say it without saying Uber, because if they say Uber, everybody's like, I don't know, Uber and cats, does that mean the cats are driving? I don't get it. So there's this question of when you say Uber, you're assuming that everybody does that translation the same way you do. And it's better to just go straight at the market category. This is what people call solutions in that market, and I'm this, and this is how I distinguish myself from the other solutions in that market. You know, it's a VC that came up with that, right? That Uber for whatever works better in a VC pitch than it does in a customer pitch. And it makes sense that a VC came up with that idea, or we're the Airbnb of whatever. But for customers, it's rotten positioning. You may get away with it with a VC, but outside of that, it's usually dangerous.
Thanks, April. That was awesome talk, especially shout out for Toonsis, the driving cat. Very, very memorable. The invent a new category, how would you advise the age of startups in this room if they think, and they're so bold to think that that's what they're doing, and it's not just hubris, they really don't see any easy comparables. You kind of briefly mentioned that a lot of companies start in niche, and then they get to like 100 million, and then they start to educate the customer on the problem. How do you work around that at the earliest stage? How to make the decision about the kind of first steps you take towards positioning something that new?
This question of how you build a market category is an interesting one. There's not a lot of good examples, but there's one that I use in my book who happens to be a good Canadian example, which you guys might have seen Mark Organ speak here before. So Mark Organ was the original founder of Eloqua, which created the category of marketing automation. And so if you ask him and you say, how did you do it at the beginning? So the first thing was, he decided he was creating this new category of software, but very specifically what he did first was he identified an emerging category of users. So he said, there are these people, and they're weirdos, like that's how he describes them. He's like, I found these weirdos in the marketing department that didn't seem like marketers, and they all used a spreadsheet, and what they were doing was demand gen. And that didn't seem like marketing at all. And so there were all these tools out there for marketers, but the demand gen people who really needed to use tools and really liked using tools, they didn't have anything. And so he said, I'm going to build software for them. That was his original idea. Now, no one would invest in him because the investors didn't believe it. So the first thing he had to do was convince his investors that this was a category that would emerge. And it wasn't until he had been in it for 3-4 years that he had enough data to be able to go and convince an investor, this is actually an emerging thing. These demand gen people are multiplying. In the future, there's going to be a bajillion of them, and my thing is going to grow up with that. And then, interestingly, his started out as software for demand gen, or demand gen automation is what he called it. And then demand gen exploded inside marketing so quickly that it actually subsumed marketing, and then he shifted the name of the category to marketing automation because all of a sudden demand gen was marketing, and that's all we were talking about. So the interesting thing about category creation is at the beginning, you have to kind of be evangelizing, hey, there's this problem you don't even know exists, right? The vast majority of marketing departments were not doing demand gen, so they didn't need demand gen automation. And so he was out speaking at conferences and talking to people and saying, the demand gen train is coming down the track, and if you're not there, you're gonna miss out. And he spent years doing that until the category itself emerged, and then he was there to ride that wave with it. Now, interestingly, that example also shows you the risks of it, which was the minute the category started to emerge and look like a thing, Marketo shows up. And so he's got a copycat product, does exactly what he does, that is super well funded, and instead of it just being a slam dunk that he owns that category, all of a sudden there's all kinds of competition in there. And in the case of Eloqua, you know, they did end up winning or being, you know, 1-2 with Marketo in that market. But it's hard. Like, it takes, your horizons are like years. If you look at what Mark's doing now with Influitive, it is again another category creation exercise that he's been 7 years at it now. And, you know, and we would argue whether or not that category of influencer marketing has been established, is ever going to be established. Like, there's great risks in taking a bet that a category is going to emerge, and if it doesn't emerge, like, you don't get to make it emerge all on your own. There needs to be market forces behind it. So you need some kind of data that helps you guess that, yeah, this is a category that's going to emerge. There will be a class of users that need this stuff, and I'm going to ride that wave in behind them and be the software that services that. But it's by far the hardest thing to do. You're welcome.
Hi, my question is that, so we are in the field of the healthcare, and usually they are very slow. So when you come up with the idea, which essentially needs that they change their current workflow to benefit from this software, essentially we say that you have been doing this way, but essentially this is a better way. So how do you communicate and position it? Because it's completely something new for them, and what angle you should take in when you are positioning yourself, say that, okay, you know, and it's not, none of those things are going to work with them because they don't know necessarily what SaaS is, you know, what is the benefit of it, you know, they used to buy a full product and you're going to their door and saying something that they're not familiar with completely. So how do you handle this kind of situation in these industries which usually they are slower?
So the question is there's existing solutions, there's existing stuff, there's existing business processes, and you're coming in and you have to change their mind and say, oh, we're going to do this different thing. Like, this is kind of the whole point of figuring out what you're going to do with market categories, because you can't just come in and say, you've been doing this thing and all of this, but I've got this thing that's over here. It's completely different, and everyone's been like, I don't know. Like, you have to actually draw the line between what they're doing today and what your thing is. Like, your example sounds super specific, so I don't know the answer to that one, but you have to, you can't just come out of nowhere. Again, everybody's going to use what they know to figure out what they don't. So you somehow have to draw the path that gets you from, you're doing this now, but you need to be doing this in the future. And somehow you need to draw the line and the connection between the two things. So they go, oh, this is what it is. Oh, that's what the value is. And sometimes you do that by putting it in a completely different context from the current thing that they're doing now. Sometimes you do it by putting it in the context of the current thing they're doing it now, but just for a certain subset of customers and say, look, not everybody has it this way, but if you're like this, this, and this, you need to do this thing. It's different. I know, I get it, but it's for this thing and this is why. In the work that I do for repositioning, we usually start by figuring out the positioning stuff, but then there's two things that flow downstream from positioning immediately. So you figure out your positioning, you have the 5 different components, you go through the process, you figure out all the things. 2 things come out of it. 1, you need to retool your messaging, and 2, you need to have something which I call a sales narrative. So what a sales narrative is it's how you take that positioning and make it real for a customer that has no clue what you do. In B2B, sales narrative always follows the same arc, and it goes like this. You're in a meeting with a customer, you come in and you say, you, my friend, you got a problem, and you define the problem space. You have a problem, this is the problem, and the customer goes, yeah, I got a problem. And this is how you're solving it today, right? The customer goes, yeah, that is how I'm solving it today. And then you say, and that sucks, right? For all these reasons, and you list all the shortcomings of the current solution. Otherwise, you wouldn't exist. Here's all the reasons that sucks. And then you take a step back and you describe the perfect world, right? In the perfect world, we would have this without this. I'd have this without the cost of this. I'd be able to do this without having to worry about this, right? And if you do that well, the customer says, yeah, shit, man, if that existed, yeah, I'd do that. And you go, have I got a thing for you? And then you switch into your pitch, right? Which is like, here's my thing. This is what we built. It's a completely different take on this problem. Here's my value. Here's the features that enable that value. Here's the proof I can deliver it. And then I got my ask at the end. So you have to be able to have this positioning and then translate it into, this is how I actually communicate this when I have a meeting with you. Problem, current solutions, shortcoming of the current solutions, worldview. If you can't bring the customer on that journey, you're never going to sell them anything. And like all that, I haven't even talked about my product yet. I'm just getting you aligned with, if you agree with the way I look at the world, then you're going to agree. If you agree with the way I look at the world, then you're going to want to buy my stuff. You think it's hot down there?
There you go.
It's pretty unusual that engineer becomes a marketing person. My question is, when did you start feeling that you're a marketer rather than an engineer? And do you also see that there's a huge gap between engineers and the sales/marketing people, since there can be gaps in between? So it's just interesting to hear your experience on that.
It actually wasn't that weird. When I started, everybody in marketing was from engineering or computer science, because we were all selling really technical stuff to really technical buyers. Like, do you know how I got my first job in marketing? Here's the requirements. They wanted somebody who could write SQL queries and wasn't afraid of public speaking, because they wanted someone to go to trade shows and literally demo stuff on stage. So I went to trade shows for 6 months. That was my job. I went to trade shows and I wrote SQL queries on stage. It's so stupid. It was the most mind-bendingly boring demos ever. But that's what we were selling. We were selling databases. If you didn't understand that, you would have had a hard time being in marketing. Now this stuff is more consumer-oriented. It's more solution-oriented. But I don't know, inside, startups are interesting. We don't learn anything in school, really, that's all that applicable to what we're going to do in a startup. So almost everybody, it's certainly true in marketing and sales, is kind of figuring out as they go along. And so you might as well come in with a technical background, and at least you can talk tech with the techies. But that said, it helps to be able to write. That's a skill that, I can't teach people, and the engineers are generally kind of shitty at that. So I don't know. It was a bit of an unconventional path at the time, but That said, I see lots of people start on the technical side, move to product management, and then move to marketing because it's not much of a jump to go from product to marketing. And then I see people go from marketing to the product side of the house as well. That happens a lot, but I don't know. My career path is totally weird. I don't think anybody should do what I did, really. But mine was just luck. Like, I called my friend, hey, can you get me a job? Yeah, sure. That was it. Sorry, that's not much of an answer.
Hi, I really like the quote that you mentioned. Customer will use what they know to figure out what they don't know. So doesn't that also create a habit in a customer to say that, this is something what a norm is? Because my question is coming from manufacturing sector, because they think that on-site solution is the way to go, and they are very resistant to use a cloud service. But as a solution provider, we can provide more solutions and better quality of solution if we take them to cloud. So how would you advise in positioning in such scenario?
But it's the opportunity and the trap, right? So they use what they know to figure out what they don't. So if you don't position it in another way, they will just automatically position you in a way that's no good for you. Right? So they'll say, oh, it's like my robot self-driving car example. I come in and say a robot, and they're like, oh, robots, yeah, we know robots, we know what that's all about. So they had to come in with completely different positioning, like way out from outside of manufacturing even, to say, you know what we're like self-driving car technology. And everybody's like, whoa, that's different. That's not this at all. And so if you don't deliberately position your stuff, your customers will do it for you, and you won't like what they do for the most part, because again, they only know what they know. So you have to take what they know from somewhere else and say, look, you're running all kinds of stuff in the cloud. Why not this? Right? You're doing all sorts of other things in the cloud. Why not this? You buy stuff on Amazon, right? Why not this? It's somehow you have to figure out how to crack the code of, we're not like this. We're actually like this, applied to a problem that's similar to that, and drag them across. So it's the trick of it. If you don't position for them, they'll position you. I used to use this example in my talks all the time of the Segway. I don't know if you read the story about the Segway, it's really neat. When the guy launched it, he wanted to keep it a big secret. He didn't want to tell people what it was about, and so he just kept telling people it was revolutionary human transport. And so he went on all these talk shows and stuff. He was kind of like Elon Musk of his day, that guy. And everybody's like, whoa, revolutionary human transport, what could it be? And so everybody just went, flying cars, man. That's what it is, flying cars. It's got to be a flying car. It's got to be a flying car. And then he goes on, Good Morning USA. They actually launched the Segway on Good Morning USA. And he comes out in this frickin' Segway, and everyone's like, what? We thought we were getting a flying car. We got this stupid two-wheel golf cart thing. And everyone's so disappointed. And then even when he got to that, he refused to position it. So he just kept saying, it's revolutionary human transport. And we're like, dude, we already know it's not that. If it was that, you'd come flying in on a saucer. And so part of the reason why it failed is because they failed to draw a line between what people already know. They could have positioned it as a scooter or a car or anything you want, but instead he just kept saying, it's revolutionary human transport. We're like, revolutionary human transport is a flying freaking car. And so the early adopters were talking about, they interviewed some early adopters for Segway, and the guy was like, you know what's the worst part about owning a Segway? If I drive it on the road, all the cars are honking at me and saying, put that scooter on the sidewalk. But if I drive it on the sidewalk, all the moms are telling me to take that car and put it on the road. So what is it? Nobody even knew where to drive the thing. It was like revolutionary human transport. Can I take it to grandma's house? Where do I put the kids? It didn't make any sense. So if you don't position it, people will try to do that positioning for you. If you make it too hard, they'll either position it against something that you don't want to be, or they'll just say, this is too hard to figure out, therefore it's nothing. It's just nothing. I'm just going to ignore it. It's stupid and ignorable.
Sorry. So our solution our product covers a number of solutions in a Yeah. It covers a number of solutions in a narrow industry, but I struggle with, do we play to the fact that we solve a number of problems, or do we hone in on the ones that are the most painful and just play to that and let the other ones be subsidiary benefits, I guess?
So the question is, should you just focus on, one problem, or sort of talk about a basket of problems? And it totally depends. Like, sometimes you can kind of tell the story where things come together and the sum of the parts is bigger, right? And sometimes, you got one main point of value, and then you got a bunch of secondary points of value, and you just got to let that shit go and just focus on let the main thing be the main thing and just focus. But every company's been different for me that way. Like, sometimes we've managed to tell this amazing story where even tiny little things have made a giant difference. And we kind of said, look, we do this big picture thing, and I couldn't weave that story without bringing in some of the smaller stuff. Other times it's like, we looked at it and was like, we did 5 things, but there's really only one that's super cool. So we're just going to stop talking about the other 4 things. They're cool, and people might buy us for that. But in our outbound marketing, we're just going to focus on the one. But it really kind of depends. Like, there isn't a hard and fast rule on that. In this process where you work through, like, what I like about this process is when you get to the stage where you're talking about unique features versus comparables, you usually end up with this giant long list of features. And then what you do is you map the features to value, and you end up with 2 to 4 value themes. And the process of doing that is usually very clarifying around, there's actually a big theme of value and a bunch of little things, and the main thing's the main thing. And that process of doing that usually helps get your thinking clear on, is it 3 things and they're all pretty important, so we got to hit all of them, or is it one thing and a couple of Ginsu knives, and but wait, that's not all, we also got 3 thing. And so, but doing the actual process of, here's everything I got that's differentiating and here's how it themes out, will sometimes clarify that. Nobody drinks beer? Yeah.
Thank you. All right, so the startup I'm with, it has 2 products, and I think this is kind of a little similar with what was just discussed earlier with weeding out the unnecessary details of your project. But we have two products, and they synergize off of each other. However, they come from different markets. Chronologically, one came before the other. But when you're speaking with a VC, how should you express the project's value, like co-value, without diluting either project?
It's hot in here too. So one question I get a lot is, I got multiple products, and should each product have its own positioning, and then what about the company positioning over top of that? And there does tend to be this hierarchy. I've got to position each product. If I have products that need to win on their own, they need to be positioned, but they also need to make sense together. If they don't make sense together, then what you have is 2 companies, not 2 products. So the first thing I would be thinking about is, do the 2 products together make sense and make each product more valuable? If they don't, then maybe you have 2 companies and you might want to split them up. The other thing is, company positioning needs to sort of be the umbrella thing over the products, unless you always lead with one of the products and the other product follows. In which case, then what you have is product positioning and the other things like an add-on or an after sale or whatever. So for the longest time, Salesforce was like essentially a one company or one product company. Like, you bought Salesforce, you bought CRM, everything else came after that. I might argue it's still like that. Like, I'm not sure you would go buy the marketing stack or the service stack from Salesforce if you didn't already own the CRM. So if you look on their website, it's super heavy on the CRM piece because that's the way they get into an account, and then everything else follows that. You'll have to decide for yours. And sometimes, You just want to drop one because it's too hard to get people to figure out what the heck you are because you are these two fundamentally different things. The story together doesn't make sense. Maybe what you got is two companies that deserve to be split apart. I worked at IBM at one point, and for every new product that we did, we had to do this ladder up all the way to the IBM positioning. So we'd say, I have a data federation tool, which is part of the database division, which is part of software group, which is part of IBM. And if I couldn't ladder it all the way up and make it fit under the whole big 100 billion revenue IBM story, then we would sell it. And we did. We sold lots of things. We're just like, it just doesn't make sense in the story anymore. It's not helping me sell the rest of the things in the family. Get rid of it. One more.
Last one. So I'm not sure if this has been asked, but basically the question was that we are competing in a market that has sort of fatigue for a solution. So many solutions have come in the past or the last decade. They have not worked. So people in that market space are tired now. So now we come in with this new, better solution. We think it's vastly different, superior and all that. But we get lumped into the same, oh, well, been there, done that, tried it, didn't work. Yes, you are a little bit special. And we say, no, no, we are quite very different. But how do we distinguish and differentiate from that?
All right, I'm running this time. Here we go. I got some more energy.
Glad it's you. I'm glad it's you running around, not me. Yeah, so the key to that is to like forget everything except the differentiator. Like you just always have to, and there's loads of examples of people coming into totally mature markets. Like Zoom is a great example. Like they're a latecomer in that market doing a thing where everybody ahead of them has failed. And they got one thing is, hey, it's video conferencing that actually works. Go figure. And so, and at the beginning, everyone's skeptical. They're like, yeah, it probably doesn't work because none of these other things I've tried have worked. And then you use it a bunch and you're like, oh, it actually works. Like the key for Zoom was they had to make it so that it was free to use because you wouldn't even try it. You were so fatigued with the whole space and so skeptical that anybody could do anything that actually worked there. So the key on it, I think, is you got to really hone in on the differentiator, and then you got to give them a reason to believe, or at least a reason to try, and then take all the friction out of that pathway to trying it or believing it. And then you have to think about, what is the one thing that I can do that can convince you that this thing does what I say it can do where all the others have failed. So, sometimes you can focus in on, I've got a patent, this thing is different, we're doing this in a totally different way. Sometimes you just have to experience it, like you have to go in, like Zoom's a good example. Like, I gotta go in, I gotta use it consistently for a couple months and go, holy shit, it actually does work. I've never had a call drop yet, that's amazing. And then over time, everybody gets like, oh yeah, they actually do what they say they can do. But I don't know, it's hard. But that said, it's still better to be coming into a fatigued market that already exists than to be creating a new one. One, because there's already demand. The work of creating the category has already been done. All you got to do is focus in on that differentiator and give everybody a reason to believe in your differentiator. This is different. We're doing this a different way. This is a different outcome. This is what we are. Just focus on that. Don't focus on anything else. Just that slice where you're different, and then figure out the path to get people on. But it's hard. All this is hard, right? If it wasn't hard, we'd be on the beach drinking out of a coconut. All right, thank you. Pick up a book on the way out.